Once we've got this set, let's go ahead and jump back to our assets.module file. We're down here in File Prepare Directory. We've got our directory set at this point, and so now it's time to actually copy the file over. So what we're going to do is use a function called file unmanaged copy, and we're going to pass it 3 parameters. First is the URI of the file that we're going to copy. The second is the destination directory where we want to place the file. And finally, we're going to pass it a constant that tells Drupal what to do if the file already exists in the directory. So in this case, what we're doing is passing it file exists replace, which means that we're going to overwrite any files that have the same name in that directory. But we can pass it a constant that says increment the name of the file so that we can have multiple files of the same name. So basically what it will do is add an _0 to the end of the file name right before the extension so we can continually add new files. We would want to use that option most of the time because we're working in a multi-user environment and somebody might upload something that has the same name but is actually a different file. In this case, since we're just using an example, we're setting it to file exists replace. This will return the completed name of the file, and so we can use that in our next step. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at what's going on in this function. I'm going to go ahead and control-click it to jump to its definition. Here we are. We see our 3 parameters getting passed: the source, the destination, and how we're going to deal with replacing existing files. The first thing that we're doing is pulling out the real path for the source URI. So what this does is take a URI and it creates an actual file path. In previous versions of Drupal, we were working with that file path when we worked with any functions having to do with files. In Drupal 7 instead, we can just use Drupal real path and get that file path if we need it. Hopefully most of the time we can use the API to work with the files, and we won't actually need to call this ourselves. We're checking to see if that file exists, and in order to use this function, we need that real path. So that's why it's getting called here. If it doesn't exist, we want to set an error. If it does exist, we want to go ahead and make sure that we have a proper destination, and we're going to build a URI from the base name of the source. So what's happening here is we're taking the file name and we're pulling out the directory name using base name, which is a PHP function. And then we're using file build URI, which will build a URI to this destination, which can then be used in the file API. Our next step is to run file prepare directory, which is the same function that we called before. But you see we're only passing it 1 parameter here, which means that by default, we're not going to create a directory if it doesn't exist already. So this is why we had to call this beforehand. In this case, what we're doing is just changing the permissions on the directory if it exists, and then that will allow us to write a file to it. We're calling file stream wrapper URI normalize, which will normalize the URI, which means that any extra slashes that have been added to the end or the beginning of the file path are removed. I'm going to scroll down a bit here. Okay, then we're going to do some checking to see if maybe there's something else going on here, and throw an error if the directory can't be prepared properly. There's a couple more validation checks going on here, and then if it passes, then it will check to make sure that there's an htaccess file in the file directory, and then it will run the PHP function copy to copy the source to the destination file. If that's unsuccessful, we set an error message in the watchdog table. If it is, then we want to change the permissions on that file so that they're the default basic permissions, which, if you remember from looking at Drupal chmod, is 644 for a file. And then we're going to return that destination path. Okay, let's jump back to the assets.module file. Now, this isn't a very complex function. There's not a lot of lines here, but I wanted to go into some of the major functions here, like file prepare directory and file unmanaged copy, because they form the basis of what happens behind the scenes when a file is being managed, when we're taking a file that's been uploaded through a form and doing something with it. These are the core functions that we're going to use to deal with it if it's unmanaged. And the managed side of it, if we decide that we want database entries for our files, is going to be very similar when it comes to the actual file processing. So this knowledge will help us understand that as well. So finally, what we're going to do in this function is set a message that says your file has been uploaded. Now we'd probably want to do some additional validation here to make sure that everything processed correctly, but we're going to keep this simple for now. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and jump back to the browser, and let's go ahead and try to upload something. Now again, we can't use a test dot something for this input because it will not pass validation. So I'm just uploading an image here. Okay, we get this, your file has been uploaded. So let's go ahead and look at the directory structure and see where our file landed and if our directory is set up properly. I'm going to jump back to our module directory here in our Drupal site, and I'm going to collapse the sites all folder here so we can concentrate on the default folder. Now inside this folder, there's a files directory. And if you remember, when we looked at the file system settings, we had a directory set for our public files and a directory set for our private files. Now because we had a directory set in the private files, this private folder was set. And then our public directory is actually this files directory. So we see we have a folder here called assets. That wasn't there before we uploaded our file. I'm going to go ahead and expand it. And you see we have a subfolder called unmanaged. I'm going to go ahead and expand that. And here we have our image. So the upload worked properly. Everything is squared away. So in the next step, what we're going to do is take a look at how to take these unmanaged files once we've put them in a place where we can find them and work with them and do something with them. In particular, what we're going to do is display a page of thumbnails and allow the user to click a link to view the entire full image.